So I did a little bit of the math, and based on information gleaned from Scott Stanford on the Raw on Netflix rollout, I have probably been watching Monday Night Raw almost 1% of my waking hours. Welcome back to the channel. It's Adam Harris, ring announcer, wrestling fan, and collector here in the Mountain State. It's a big deal. We all know the card is stacked for Monday night's move to Netflix, but perhaps what means more to me is the move from USA. After all, I was a young man, 11 years old, tuning in that first night. I couldn't wait for the first episode of Monday Night Raw. I was already well versed in the VCR game. I'd been taping primetime wrestling. As you can see, it was on channel 11 at 9 o'clock. But in January of '93, as we know, Raw debuted from the Manhattan Center. And I've been digging in, getting prepared for this, because I remember that first episode so well. Of course, I've watched it back a couple times now. And the thing about primetime wrestling was those usually came from arena shows, bigger events. You could tell the fans just seemed further away. It was usually not lit as well. The Manhattan Center looked so much different. The Manhattan Center looked intimate. It looked crazy. It looked like the fans were right on top of them. And you could hear them in a different way than you could ever hear the fans. This was authentic reaction from the New York audience there at the Manhattan Center. So you could tell that was remarkably different. The commentators were Macho Man, Vince McMahon, and Rob Bartlett, who was apparently a radio DJ. In the first episode, you hear Vince thank Don Imus, the radio personality, for letting Rob Bartlett be a part of the show. And he's not that good. I remember being, even as a kid, not thinking that Rob Bartlett was fitting in, although he does have some zingers in here throughout the evening. The first episode of Raw is up on the WWE Vault YouTube channel. It's only 45 minutes. That first episode was an hour long. And the commentators throughout the show, I remember this so well, they keep trying to get over this. It sounds so Vince McMahon looking back on it now. He would say, "It's uncensored," and Macho would go, "Uncut," and Bartlett would go, "Uncooked." And they got it right a few times. They worked to try to get it right throughout the show, and it lasted longer than it had any right to. Thankfully, they eventually got rid of that tagline. I just miss Bobby Heenan, though. I remember back then I missed Bobby Heenan, but he was such a memorable part of this episode, trying to break in. He'd been replaced by Rob Bartlett, and he's posing as Bartlett's mom and Bartlett's uncle, or maybe it's his aunt and his uncle, trying to get in, and so memorable. That's one of the things I definitely remember when I think about the first night of Raw, was Bobby Heenan trying to get in. And of course, they finally let him in at the end of the night. As soon as the show's over, they give him clearance to go on in. "Have fun, Bobby," he says. The opening match was Koko Beware versus Yokozuna, and what a captivating image Yokozuna was. And looking back on it now, they're leading up to the Royal Rumble, and they were about to go all in on Yokozuna. He was going to win that Battle Royal, go on to main event WrestleMania 9. And they devote a lot of TV time to him. Bartlett says, "You wouldn't have to have the headlock on Hunger if this guy would skip a few meals." He gets some good ones in on Yokozuna. And then up next is the debut of the Steiner Brothers. And on that last episode of Primetime, they cut to a promo announcing that the Steiner Brothers were going to be making their debut on Monday Night Raw. And that could not have been more exciting to me as an 11-year-old. You know, Ric Flair had jumped from WCW a couple years earlier, and the Steiner Brothers coming to the WWF was a huge, huge deal. And this is '93. I think I was probably at least 5 years away from having the internet at all, much less looking up results on the internet. So this is where you got your information. The magazines months later, but for me, the debut of the Steiner Brothers could not have been more exciting. Crowd was into it at the Manhattan Center. I wonder how Big Papa Pump felt about Doink being in the crowd the whole time. I didn't really remember that part. And you can even tell Steiner's kind of looking at him. He's got his back to the camera and he's looking. You can see Doink in the background. But the crowd was into it. Exciting match, the Steiner Brothers debuting. And it was different. It was the Executioners, I think, which of course they normally would have been known as Dwayne Gill and Barry Hardy. But under the masks, they were wrestling as the Executioners against the Steiners. But speaking of investment, there was an investment on Doink. When you look back on this episode, you see him about 3 different times. They are investing TV time in Doink, getting this character over, and it would keep happening. The more you dive in to some of the history of those early years of Monday Night Raw, Doink is all over the place. Doink, a big deal in 1993, and I am so nostalgic for this. This is the stuff I love the most. And so while I know I'm going to love Raw on Netflix Monday, the January 6th. I will always love these early Raws so much because that's what I was watching in my early days as a fan. We get a heel Razor Ramon promo coming up next, which is great. They kind of make it seem like he wants Bret Hart's gold because he likes gold. You know, he's got gold around his neck, and he's coming to take Bret Hart's gold. He attacked Owen Hart, and he's got his championship match at the Royal Rumble.
Ladies and gentlemen, in less than 2 weeks, Sunday afternoon, he's a bad guy.
We get Max Moon versus HBK. More Doink during this match, and Shawn Michaels wins with what is basically the angle slam. And I definitely remember that being his finisher. He hits the super kick, but that's not a finish. You get the angle slam style finish. And this Max Moon is not Conan. This was actually Paul Diamond. It was Kato as part of the Orient Express. And I found out that he and Shawn Michaels teamed up in the early days, like in 1988. He was one of Shawn Michaels' first, if not his first, tag team partners back in the Texas days. So that's a cool connection that they met one-on-one here on the debut episode of Raw. They go to the Royal Rumble Event Center, which I always love those segments with those interviews. But what I found out is that actually while that was happening, the crowd in the Manhattan Center, they got basically a dark match. Tito Santana took on Iron Mike Sharp. So that was a cool and an interesting one. I also found out that Crush and Bam Bam Bigelow wrestled after things went off the air, which made sense because they close up with Crush kind of chasing Doink around because he was sick of his jokes, and Crush chases him off. Turns out they had a match afterwards, and of course Doink came out, what I read, to interfere in that one as well. Doink all over the place on the early Monday Night Raw. And that final match, Undertaker versus Damien Demento, that was interesting because it was kind of like Damien Demento's first name match. You know, this was not, it was turned into kind of a squash match. It was only a couple of minutes, but it was like two established characters taking each other on, and that was part of what was new and felt different about Monday Night Raw. This is a cool match, but Bartlett cracked me up because they announced Damien Demento, and he says, oh, at least he's using his real name. He's kind of like burying the business at certain parts throughout this. Rob Bartlett, I don't know how much wrestling he watched, and I'd love to hear the story about how this guy got picked, especially to fill the seat of Bobby Heenan. I mean, come on. Maybe the whole stint was to make us want Bobby Heenan back. And he would be back in a couple weeks for that famous Flair and Mr. Perfect match. And he's one of the best parts, just like the 92 Rumble. And his participation on commentary in this match is just as unique, makes the whole entire match, and that's one of my favorite matches of all time. It was about 3 weeks in. It was the week after the Royal Rumble, I believe, on Monday Night Raw. And so they go off the air with Doink at ringside in his sling, and Crush comes out and threatens him to break his other arm if he keeps up these jokes that only he's laughing at. The thing that I will always love about this show is the intimate feel, the iconic entrance with that neon WWF, and of course the uncensored, the uncut, and the uncooked thing. Just hilarious that they were getting that over back in the day, trying to seem edgy and trying to seem raw. But somebody says something about, oh, well, he should have brought a knife to this fight. And he's like, well, we're not that uncensored. You know, interesting. They were walking that line with USA. So I've been doing a lot of research on the Monday Night Raw. I actually looked at the WWE schedule on historyofwwe.com. They had 5 events on January 9th. 5 events on January 9th. 2 matinees, and then 3 evening shows throughout Maine, Boston, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. On the 10th, they only had 4 shows. 2 of them were in Florida, and 2 of them were in Ohio. And then from those 2 groups, they had to meet at the Manhattan Center for Monday Night Raw. You talk about an insane schedule. A few of those guys had to fly back from Florida to New York. I'm sure some people flew from Cleveland, probably from those Ohio dates, to make it to New York. So they didn't leave much room for error when it came to being live on Monday Night Raw on USA for the first time. When you look back on it, it could have been pretty risky that some of the talent might not have made it. But it turned into a historic event and something we'll always look back on fondly. At least I will. And I'll be thinking of myself as an 11-year-old, thinking about almost 1% of my life having been watching Monday Night Raw. And I will be definitely tuning in on. So I told you I started my new year watching wrestling on Netflix, but I have my very own vault, my very own WWE Vault. I wanted to show you some of the physical media that I've been doing my research on related to Monday Night Raw. First of all, this was a Christmas present from my dude Jeff. The Best of Raw, Volume 1. This is actually just the best of late 98 and most of 99 on here. The reign of Stone Cold Steve Austin is on here. You get the early Undertaker and Kane stuff, the great Mankind stuff. This VHS is worth your time if you get a chance to check it out. All bangers on that one. Then we've got the Best of Raw, 15th Anniversary Edition, 1993 to 2008. This is 9 hours of footage on 3 discs. This one is really good, and it's got things broken down onto moments here. Cena on this particular DVD, but of course the one that I've been watching for this episode, 93 to 97. It's got some of the early greatest hits. There's some overlap on these for sure. Some of them are more thorough than the others. This one I think was probably a cash grab because it's got cheesy as hell music. This is from 2010. 12 hours of footage on 4 discs here. The beginnings, the best of Season 1 and Season 2. So the content is good on here, but the stuff in between is all just generic. It reeks of 2010 WWE DVD syndrome on this one, but tons of great moments. Really like this one. And then this is the big kahuna. 20th anniversary, Monday Night Raw. 31 hours on 12 discs. This has the 20 greatest uncut and unedited episodes. You've got the May 17th episode, which is legendary because that's when the Kid beat Razor Ramon, and then also when Shawn Michaels was challenged by the returning Marty Jannetty. And that was the match of the year in 1993. I went back and watched it. Definitely a great match and worth revisiting. And then, of course, WWE Vault on YouTube. They posted the first episode of Raw. I might have mentioned that earlier. It's only 45 minutes. Really easy to consume that. Go back and see what it was like in 1993. And here's some of Rob Bartlett's greatest hits. And so, of course, some classic Vince and Macho as well. And then on Netflix, I just typed in WWE, and it's actually still on the screen back there. But they've got some profiles up. They have 25 superstar profiles, 25 current stars. And so some of that may give you an inkling about who they're expecting to be back soon. There's some top 10s. I watched the top 10 Intercontinental title matches, or at least half of it. That was about a 3-hour thing, I think, 2 or 3 hours. And then there's Raw Classics with Big E, and they have some of the best Raw moments from HBK, from Charlotte, Ray, The Taker. And those are like an hour, hour and a half highlight matches of some of their best matches. So there's some profiles there. And then they've got the Raw Vault, which is select episodes of Monday Night Raw. Of course, that May 17th episode is on there. The first episode's on there, but is not the entirety of the first year of Monday Night Raw. So they pick and choose that. I guess I understand why they do, but it's one of the reasons I like having access to a certain amount of physical media so I can catch up on some things that might not be available on streaming. So I'm going to be tuning in this Monday night like I have almost every Monday night since 1993. More exciting stuff planned on the channel for 2025. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time. Hope to see you at the matches.